Hello Ashes, this is Inquisitor, welcome back. Today I have a deck tech for you, and I would like to introduce you to my new and improved pile of good cards. This is a modified version of the Herald Westraven deck that I took to the 4th season of the Shuffle Bus tournament, and it is a combination of that list and something very similar to the 4-book Aerodel list that Phil Reiskamp is currently using in the 5th season of the Shuffle Bus tournament. So we'll start with the Phoenixborn. I like Herald. Herald is pretty well regarded as one of the strongest Phoenixborn in the game. His stat line is fair to robust, and his ability is very strong, Hunter's Mark. All the Phoenixborn that don't have to pay any dice for their ability tend to get a lot of attention. The deck, or the dice spread on the deck, is 3 nature, 2 ceremonial, and 5 charm dice. When we start about talking about the list itself, the reason that those dice are in those ratios will become a little bit clearer. So we'll get into the deck itself. We'll start with what I consider to be the core of most Ashes decks, the ready spells. So this deck runs Frostback Bear, Mindfog Owl, and Ruby Cobra. So round 1, that is 6 dice, and then from every round thereon, that is going to be 5 dice, specifically being 1 class natural, 1 charm class, and 1 charm power, and then 2 basic dice. And for those 5 dice, you get a Bear, a Mindfog Owl, and Ruby Cobra. The main win condition of this deck is swinging, doing damage to an opponent's Phoenixborn by attacking them with units. And Frostback Bear and Mindfog Owl in tandem do a very good job with that. That is something that is referred to in the community as the Foggy Bear combo, because the Bear has Terrifying 1, and the Mindfog Owl has the Unseen ability. So if the Bear is able to bypass units, the Owl also gets to get in for free. So this is a way to fairly consistently get 4 damage on an opponent's Phoenixborn if all they've got are small units that aren't very good at defending. To help facilitate that even more, we're running additional copies of the Mindfog Owl book because, as you can see, you have the Focus ability, where if you spend any power charm dice to activate the Mindfog Owl, you get to put one of those dice on an opponent's unit. So this is a way to possibly shrink relevant blockers down to a point where they can't defend successfully versus a Bear and a Mindfog Owl swinging in. And then we have a newcomer to the list, the Ruby Cobra, which for a single die gets you a robust 0-2 unit that becomes a 1 attacker whenever it attacks and also causes your opponent to mill a card. It's just a very efficient unit that is resilient, and it's a great way to spend a single die. So these units are really the core of the deck. And complemented with Herald, the Bear and the Mindfog Owl, both being a 2-attack unit, can take out a Knight if your opponent decides to drop one of those against you. So this deck is very good at trading units and eventually grinding out an advantage and disincentivizing your opponent to play anything that's really a quality unit, because Herald's strength is eliminating quality units at little to minimal cost for him. Next, we'll move on to the allies. We'll start with the big guys. There are 2 Hammer Knights and a Blood Archer in the list. Hammer Knight is kind of a self-explanatory if you're in ceremonial and nature. It's just a nice big chunky unit. It's a 3/4 with Recover 2, and if it hits anything and destroys a unit, it gets to ping something else. It also doesn't exhaust to block. So it's just a real sturdy unit, and also coupled with Hunter's Mark, being able to stalk a unit and destroy anything that is up to even a 6 life unit and guarantee your Aftershock is pretty strong. The Blood Archer is there. This is somewhat of a controversial pick. Some people don't like the Blood Archer because, well, he wounds himself to do what he does. But he is the only other knight that we really have access to in our color combination, and he still has a very robust stat line. And if you drop him later in the round, when your opponent's resources tend to be taxed and he is safe to shoot, he can do a great job of pinging off small units or wounded units, and then putting that 3 attack value to good use. We're also running it in the event that we maybe want to do a double knight open. That's not something that's very common, but it is a possibility. We have 3 enchanted violinists. For a single class die, you get a unit that does a whole lot. 1 die for 1 damage is already a good ratio in Ashes, and this unit provides that. You can immediately play them as a main action, and then side action use their Song of Sorrow to not only ping a unit for 1 damage, but also possibly mill a card off the top of your opponent's deck, which has some redundant synergy with the Ruby Cobra. As you can see, this deck has a little bit of a mill backup win condition if the battlefield kind of gets stalled out. To further help with that win condition, that backup win condition, we have a 1x Imperial Ninja. It's just another 2/2 that, with Hunter's Mark, can kamikaze into a knight and trade favorably for it. And like the Ruby Cobra, all it has to do is be declared as an attacker to do what it does. And what it does is either get a random card out of your opponent's hand or cause them to mill 2 off the top. Some people don't like the Ninja. I think it's a little slept on just because in a deck like this where your spell board is only a 3 and you might not necessarily have room for a 3-eyed owl, the Imperial Ninja is a guaranteed way to get your opponent to discard a card, providing you can declare it as an attacker. So if you end up in an extreme late game scenario where your opponent is just refusing to play cards from hand to avoid fatigue damage, you have the option to possibly ceremonial recur the Ninja back, and then all you have to do is attack once, and it's going to get a card out of your opponent's hand, and they're going to start moving into fatigue damage. And then rounding out our allies, we have a 1x Fire Archer, which is about the right number for this card, especially on only 2 ceremonial die. It gives this deck a little bit of burn, and possibly a searchable way to close the game out if your opponent is particularly low on life. It's just a very efficient unit. It is a 1 attack unit for a class die that also does a unit to face. Speaking of efficient units, we have 2 Raptor Herders in the list. This is a nice unit that comes in and provides you with an extra body, and also has some synergy with the Mindfog Owl, just helping you to really go wide. Raptor Herders regarded again as one of the stronger allies in the game. As this list suggests, it's just a pile of good cards. So now we'll move on to the action spells. Herald innately has good removal through Hunter's Mark, but it's kind of easy to overestimate the effect of that or over-rely on it to the point where if you don't run some additional spot removal, you can get punished for that. Like a Golden Veil can really ruin your day, or any deck that has a way to protect a marked unit. So for that reason, we're running 3 Festers. Fester is a fantastic removal spell to run if you're also in nature, because you have what some refer to as the Pester play, which is using a side action to natural power die, ping a unit to wound it, and then main action, Fester and destroy it. It can become a 2-die combo to get rid of any unit in the game. Fester is just a fantastic removal option. It's probably one of the best spot removal cards, if not the best spot removal card outside of Phoenixborn Uniques. To further supplement our removal package, we have 2 Blood Chains. While not strictly a removal card, when a unit in Ashes is exhausted, that's almost as good as being dead. In some cases, it's even worse. because you have that unit exhausted, taking up battlefield real estate, which is a very limited resource in this game, and just being dead weight. So we have 2 blood chains here, which also fill the role of being able to help self-clear. Herald does have a very wide battlefield, but it can clog up if you're in necessarily like a control matchup, or maybe you have like a double Raptor Herder turn, or your opponent is just not doing a fantastic job of clearing out your units, or maybe letting you have small things that aren't particularly threatening, and you're clogged up with a bunch of, Raptor hatchlings and cobras and, your fire archer, some exhausted violinists. Blood Chains has a great way to shift the battlefield landscape in your favor pretty quickly for the modest cost of a single class ceremonial die. Speaking of rapidly changing the battlefield landscape, we have 3 Nature's Wrath. Having some kind of area of effect is almost mandatory in this particular meta of Ashes. And for 1 class die, you can hit everything on the battlefield, which can clear off some of your exhausted units that are taking up space that you would like to fill with a fresh Frostback Bear or a Mindfog Owl. It also sets up Festers. Nature's Wrath just does a lot of things that you want. You can even Hunter's Mark as a side action, and then Nature's Wrath to get rid of a 2 health unit, in addition to anything that might be wounded or 1 health on your opponent's side. Finally, this is a new add to the deck, and I'm very happy to include this card. I think it's got a lot of potential. We have 2 Generosity. So for a main action and a side action, and then a single class charm for this list, we get to do a number of things. And in this list, it's almost always going to function as an extra copy of Herald's unique Consume Soul, in which we're going to refresh Herald and get our Hunter's Mark back online. And then we're either drawing cards or healing 2 wounds. But this is sort of just a great utility card in that it can function as removal, it can be healing, it can let us dig for our extra copies of Mindfog Owl books if that's what we're looking for. Generosity is just a very flexible card. In a pinch, it can be used as a first 5 answer to opposing owls, if that's the route you want to go. And now we'll move on down to the reaction spells. We're using 3 Consume Souls. This is Herald's unique. It's just a fantastic spell. Herald's life total is a little deceptive and misleading. It is 16, but through Consume Soul and then the added redundancy of Generosity, you can reliably get him up to around the 20 health mark, which even for the most aggressive burn decks is a fairly daunting number to come up with. And then it also functions as additional removal by refreshing as Hunter's Mark. We have the 1x Ice Trap just because it's a very handy card to have. It catches people by surprise. It can be a possible first 5 option if you feel like that's the route you want to go with, dealing with an owl. It's just a value removal card. It could easily be something else, but nobody's really going to question you for playing Ice Trap. And then this is another sort of spicy addition. We have a 1x copy of Summon Sleeping Widows. This is just a fun card. It's another very efficient good card because for 2 class dice you get 2 2/1s. That can end up being 2 dice for 4 damage, which is a very favorable variable, very favorable value. It is a first 5 possibility and something that opponents have to start playing around once they see it's in your deck. It also buffs up your Conjuration count by 6, making it a little bit harder for your opponent to guess what kind of stuff you've got floating around in your Conjuration pile. So that is the deck in and of itself, the full 30 cards. You can see that this is a list that wins mostly by swinging for face or trying to bypass damage through the Bear and Mindfog Owl's terrifying and unseen abilities. You can close out the game with a searchable fire archer, and then there might be a little bit of combination of fatigue damage coming into play through repeated cobra swings, some good hits from enchanted violinists, and then maybe a swing or two from an Imperial Ninja. But mostly this deck, it is going to go more towards the long game because you have a bunch of mid-range threats that you're going to produce, and then you have only a few knights. So this is a deck that is going to really trade back and forth on units and then look to really get exponential value through favorable trades utilizing Hunter's Mark. I'm going to talk about a couple different first 5 options. Real easy right off the bat. It's going to be a Bear, Mindfog Owl, and a Ruby Cobra. Those are 3 cards that you're pretty much almost always going to use in every single matchup. And that is going to cost you 6 dice on your first round, leaving you 4 dice left over. So those 4 dice can be spent on one of the knights, a Hammer Knight or a Blood Archer, and then any one of the 3 1-cost allies, being the Enchanted Violinist, Fire Archer, or Raptor Herder. Or you also have the option for an Ice Trap. Starting a knight is probably a pretty safe play if you're not seeing your opponent showing any nature or ceremonial, or if they're not a Phoenixborn that has any kind of exclusive unique removal tool. If you want to take a slightly more conservative first 5 and don't want to invest too heavily in a threat that could be neutralized for value, you've got the option of maybe doing 2 dice for Imperial Ninja and then 2 dice for the Summoning Sleeping Widows. That lets you go for a wider approach and doesn't give your opponent any one single good target apart from maybe like the Frostback Bear. But if you've got an opponent using dedicated first 5 removal on a Frostback Bear, you feel pretty okay with that exchange. You do also have the option to go Ping Fester for 2 dice, and then Imperial Ninja again for another 2 dice. So those are a couple of general first 5 options. If you have to deal with a 3-eyed owl, the possibility of a 3-eyed owl across from you, that's where things can get a little tricky, and that's why 3-eyed owl is so good, and a glaring omission from this list, which I will talk about very shortly. So if you need to respond to a 3-eyed owl, you have the option of just straight up going to the casino, first 5ing a Generosity, and playing that to draw 3 cards. And hopefully you hit like another Mindfog Owl book or some other usable cards. That is a fair play, not without its risks. It potentially has some big rewards, but it's not necessarily what I would go to. I think your safest course of action dealing with an anticipated 3-eyed owl is first 5ing one of the cheap allies, the Enchanted Violinist, Fire Archer, or Raptor Herder, and then just letting your opponent use the memory drain on the 3-eyed owl. So you'll discard the ally. You'll then have the ability to use a ceremonial power die to recur it, and that is going to cost you 2 dice. So you'll have another 2 dice left over. So you're probably looking at Imperial Ninja as your 5th first 5 card. That position, you also have the possibility of doing Ping Fester if you went with the Enchanted Violinist as your discard ally. And now I'm going to talk about this list and going back to 3-eyed owl. This is what I would use for a closed deck list tournament, like any of your general local events or most traditional Plat Hat Games OP events where deck lists are closed and your opponent don't know what you're running. If we're talking about Shuffle Bus style events where we have open deck lists and all competitors know card for card what is in everybody's deck, I would not run this list as it is. I would run something very close to it, but not this exact 30 cards. I would make a couple changes. One of them would be adding in a three-eyed owl, and the other would be adding in one copy of Golden Veil. And to make room for that, we would be reducing our Enchanted Violinist down to 2 and our Raptor Herder down to 1 to make room for one copy of Summon Three-Eyed Owl and one copy of Golden Veil. That's really the only changes I would make if I was going to take this to an open decklist tournament. And that about wraps up this deck tech. It's been doing well in the little bit of testing that I've had so far. And this is a fairly simple, straightforward list that I think is accessible to pretty much anybody. Even if you're new to Ashes, there are some 1X allies in here that might throw you off, but there is enough simplicity and straightforward aspect to this deck that pretty much anybody can pick up, play it, and they will probably do pretty reasonably well with it. So I would just like to say thank you for taking the time to sit with me on my deck tech here. And if you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to ask. You can comment in the video link, and I will also leave a link to this deck in the description. And I really do appreciate the support, so please like, subscribe, share, and just interact. And I hope that any of you who take this list out for a spin enjoy what it can do, and I would love to hear what you think about it. So I am going to say thank you for watching, and goodbye.